And throughout history, water has been a major obstacle to military operations. And of course, we think in terms of landing on beaches, especially with World War II recent history. So going back to the Battle of Marathon, Persians landing on the beach in front of the plains of Marathon, the Battle of Nassau, where the U.S. landed Marines against the British fortifications there, and of course the classics for World War II like Dieppe, Normandy, Iwo Jima. Those are what we think about when we think of amphibious assaults or trying to deal with this water obstacle. But in reality, it's more than just that. Anytime you have to cross a large body of water, including large rivers, you're going to have the same challenges. And again, way back into history, the Hydaspes, Battle of Granicus, to World War II, we've got the Volga, the Peter River crossing, and honestly, some of the larger rivers in the island hopping campaigns in the Pacific or in Burma. These water obstacles present challenges, but also sometimes advantages to the attacker. So, fortunately for us, Bolt Action Warlord Games has provided us a set of rules that we can use to represent some of these things. Unfortunately, they're scattered through a lot of different campaign books. So what I'm going to try to do in this small series of videos is cover for you how to incorporate and explain some of these rules for what they call amphibious assaults. So let's go down into the classroom and dive into this topic a little bit more. Welcome to the classroom. Okay, I know it's nice to be out on the beach and all, but let's get down to business. We're going to learn how to do amphibious assaults. Really, it's pretty easy. Okay, this will probably just be one video long, unlike the desert rules, because really there's two types of movements in here. There's two types of water that affect you. There will be a second video, but in that one we're going to actually look at some vehicles themselves and how the different water abilities are written into their rules. Okay, so let's just take a look at basically water in general, and that's really what we're doing here. Now I'm going to start this by prefacing this. What we're dealing with here are large bodies of water. These aren't the small little creeks or streams that you can walk across with difficulty. Those would be counted more like obstacles. Okay, so you'd have a creek that maybe artillery and wheeled vehicles can't go through, except maybe across a ford. Okay, you might have a river that's low enough that tracked vehicles can ford across it at any point, but maybe artillery can't, maybe wheeled can't. Those are too shallow. Think of water that's like 18 inches or less. Okay, that slows you down, but it's not going to stop you, unless again you're a wheeled vehicle or artillery. What we're talking about here is shallow water and deep water. Think 3 foot or deeper. If you're 3 foot to 5 foot water, 3 to 4 foot water, you're talking shallow water. Anything over that, you're talking deep. Remember, you're dealing with a fully equipped soldier, pack and everything. So don't get hung up on the depth, specific depth. Just look at given this position of water on the body, how much cover are they really getting? How easy is it for them to swim, especially given, if you take into consideration, currents and waves, okay? So, let's start with movement in water in general. And that's really what we're dealing with here, is movement in water. And there's two types of water, deep and shallow. Imagine that, nice and simple. Okay, so anyway, deep water is impassable to all units at all, unless they have the waterborne or amphibious rule. Now, those are the rules we're going to talk about in the next video. There may also be other rules by other names that allow a unit to go into water, shallow or deep, and it'll specify that. But it won't necessarily be called waterborne or amphibious. All right, so now we're going to assume, think about this, that infantry laden with other kit they need to carry in combat cannot swim. So even though I can swim in 6 or more feet of water, I'm going to drown because I can't swim with 80 pounds on my back. All right, so that's what you're trying to think of here. So these are the rules that apply.
Nothing can go in that water unless it has amphibious or waterborne. And if the vehicle with those rules is immobilized in deep water, it will automatically drift 6 inches forward every time it receives an order. Thinking in terms of this, now you're going to go forward because it's the momentum you had when you were hit, okay? But that's why it's D 6 inches. It drifts less than 6 inches. I'm going to have a house rule that will alter that slightly in the case of rivers, but we'll talk about it in a different video. All right, units in deep water suffer an additional -1 to hit when firing their onboard weapons because their waves are rocking. And even if it's in a river or lake, I mean, you've got waves. This is large bodies of water, so you're going to have instability. So you're always -1 to hit when you're shooting out of deep water. Now, you can agree to ignore that deep water rule, this particular in specific cases. So if you know that, like, it's a calm day in the scenario that you guys are playing, it's a slow-moving river, it's still water, you can get rid of that. But in general, most of the times amphibious stuff like this is happening, there's a lot of instability in the water. A time where we might want to use that, for example, would be a night fighting scenario where you're sneaking across the river to get to your opponent, and it's a relatively slow-moving river. Just thematic there. Okay, so anyway, now here's the thing. Now, a transported unit inside that vehicle that does not have the waterborne or amphibious rule is, and it's forced to dismount in deep water, and it can try to reach an area of shallow water with its move to dismount. So if it can't reach the shallow water, it's destroyed. Now, think about this. When a vehicle is destroyed, you roll D6, and that's how far you can go. If you can't reach that shallow water within that die roll, the unit's gone. Infantry, artillery, you name it. The only exceptions would be if you're carrying a jeep or a tank that happens to have amphibious. You got a duck in your landing craft, or a Schwimmwagen in your landing craft. Those have the waterborne or amphibious rule, and so you can go ahead and use. It's just those can go into the water just fine. All right, so that's deep water, the most dangerous. And honestly, the first time you come on the table in most amphibious games, that first few inches, 6 inches or so, or maybe 9 inches, is deep water. And if you get lost in there, it may be hard for your stuff to get to the shallow water. So be very careful that first time you bring them on. All right, so here's shallow water. Think of this again, waist deep and down. You've got, or chest deep and lower, right? This is treated as rough ground. You can move through it. You can't swim through it. You can move through it, though. But it actually gives you some advantages. So infantry, waterborne, or amphibious are the only units that can move in water. So your artillery unit from the previous deep water gets into shallow, they're kind of stuck. It's treated as impassable. So if the thing is here, artillery unit lost in a transport, or that's in a transport that's got sunk in deep water, it can try to make it to shallow water, but it's impassable terrain to artillery. So you're always going to lose your artillery units if the vehicle, the amphibious craft, is sunk or immobilized in deep water. That's the way it is. Now, if, however, you're in a amphibious thing in your transport and you're immobilized or forced to dismount while you're in shallow water, you can try to reach an area of solid ground just like you would. You'll roll at D6, see if you can get far enough to get onto dry land. If you can, great. If you can't, you're gone. Now, while infantry is moving in the water, it cannot do anything else. So you cannot fire weapons in the water. You can't, try to go down and put, plant charges in it, on something like if you're under a bridge. You have to be out of the water. So the best you can do, because it's treated as rough ground, the best you can do is advance 6 inches. May as well treat it as a run because you can't fire. But the thing is, you also have to pass an order test every time you're in the water, even if you're not pinned. I don't have any comments on that. That's just the way the rule is. I'm not certain why they have that one there. Maybe just I don't know, I just can't imagine it, but that's the way it is. Water is not an easy thing to move through it, so maybe that's what it's about. But the water actually provides you hard cover. I don't know if you guys have ever seen any like Mythbusters on this, but high velocity rifle rounds and machine gun rounds, when they hit water, they slow down fast. In fact, some of them disintegrate upon impact, and those even smaller pieces move even less far, okay? So when you are shooting into the surf, you're more than likely not going to hit your target unless you hit your target above water, or you hit really, really close to them and it hits them hard enough, just below the waterline kind of thing. So they're considered, like I said, to be in hard cover, -2 to hit. Now, when the infantry does finally move from shallow water onto dry land, they will take a pin. They're considered to be disordered in that sense, so they'll have one pin on them, additional just for moving and reaching dry land, so to speak, hard ground. It represents difficulty of regrouping after getting out of the water. Now, finally, waterborne vehicles, not amphibious, but waterborne. We'll get into those in the next video. Those vehicles may end their move overlapping dry ground, solid ground, for up to half their length. So this allows you to get your landing craft at least onto the beach so that the infantry, artillery, and vehicles and wheeled vehicles can just run right off it into solid ground and not have to worry about moving through that shallow water. So that's the last piece. So that's it for amphibious rules, assault rules. Very short. In the next video, before we get into a field exercise, we're actually going to go through some examples of the vehicles to show you how they impact. And I'll go ahead and set a couple mats up on the table where we'll go ahead and we'll walk through how these would work.
Alright, I hope that was enlightening and you found some value in that exercise of learning how to apply these rules, and maybe you can see some ways you can incorporate them in your scenarios. What I'd like to do next week is we're going to cover kind of the different craft, some of the different craft that you can use, and how some of the rules associated with the watercraft affect these amphibious assault rules. So stay tuned.